Prepare for a story that will shock you. I went to the doctor for a simple backache. The X-ray revealed something terrifying. My intestines were full of mercury. My own wife was slowly poisoning me, and my son knew all about it. They thought I was just a useless old man. They were wrong. First and foremost, I want to give a very special, heartfelt shout out to my wonderful and active subscribers, Sharon from Jamaica, Nikki from South Jersey, and Angela from Nigeria. Your support from all corners of the world means the world to me. Thank you for being with me. And of course, if you believe that justice always finds a way, be sure to subscribe to the channel. And now make yourselves comfortable. My name is Jamal, and I am 70 years old. For 40 of those years, my life was measured by the rhythm of the tides. I was a sailor, a man who spent 8 months of every year on the vast, lonely expanse of the ocean, wrestling a living from its depths on shrimp boats and cargo ships. The salt spray was my constant companion. The roar of the engines, my lullaby. It was a hard, dangerous life, a life that etched deep lines into my face and infused my bones with a permanent, weary ache. I miss birthdays, anniversaries, and school plays. I miss watching my son, Michael, grow from a boy into a man. But I did it without complaint because I was a provider. Every dollar I earned, every risk I took was to build a safe, comfortable harbor for my family back on shore, in our proud brick house, in a quiet neighborhood of Atlanta. The harbor, I discovered upon my retirement, was not as safe as I had imagined. When I finally came ashore for good, I expected to be welcomed as a conquering hero returning from a long war. I expected to finally enjoy the fruits of my labor, to spend my golden years surrounded by the love and gratitude of the family I had sacrificed everything for. Instead, I found myself an intruder in my own home, a stranger in a life that had been built in my absence. My wife, Aaliyah, the woman whose youthful portrait I had kept taped inside my locker on every ship I ever served on, now looked at me with a cool, polite indifference. The decades of my absence had created a chasm between us that my permanent presence now seemed to make wider, not narrower. She had built her own life, her own routines, her own world, and I, the husband who had funded it all, no longer fit into it. My son, Michael, was a man I barely knew, his life a whirlwind of work, and his own young family. Our conversations were awkward, stilted affairs, filled with the things we could not say. He and his wife treated me with a kind of dutiful, distant respect, like a visiting dignitary they were obligated to entertain, but were secretly eager to see leave. I was a ghost at my own family's feast, a silent, awkward presence in the comfortable life my hard labor had provided. Only my grandchildren, with their innocent, uncomplicated love, seemed to truly see me. Their laughter was the only music that filled the lonely silence of my new life. In their eyes, I was not a burden or an intruder. I was just Grandpa, the man with the fascinating stories of faraway lands and the strong, calloused hands that were perfect for pushing a swing. The feeling of being a burden was a constant low-grade hum in the background of my days. It was in the way Aaliyah would sigh when I asked her a question while she was watching her television shows. It was in the way Michael would glance at his watch during our stilted conversations. I had spent my entire life providing for them, and now that I was no longer a source of income, my very presence seemed to be an expense they were tired of paying. I was a ship that had completed its final long voyage, now left to rust in the harbor, a useless relic of a bygone era. It was my back that finally brought the simmering, unspoken truths of our family to a boil. The years of heavy lifting and sleeping on narrow ship bunks had taken their toll, leaving me with a chronic grinding pain in my lower back. On a particularly bad morning, I could barely get out of bed. Aaliyah, with a sigh of martyred impatience, drove me to the local clinic. The doctor, a young man who looked like he had just graduated from medical school, listened to my complaints with a professional but distracted air. He recommended an X-ray, just to rule out any serious spinal issues. I lay on the cold, hard table of the X-ray machine, the heavy lead apron a familiar weight on my chest, and I felt a profound sense of weariness. I was just an old man with a bad back, another name on a long list of patients, another problem to be managed. An hour later, the doctor returned to the examination room, but his expression was no longer one of distracted professionalism. It was a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. He was holding my X-ray films up to the light box, his brow furrowed, his head tilted. "Mr. Washington," he began, his voice hesitant, "your spine looks exactly as I would expect for a man of your age and profession. Some arthritis, some disc compression. But there's something else here, something I've never seen before." He beckoned me over. "Look at this," he said, pointing a pen to the ghostly gray and white image of my own insides, your intestinal tract. "Do you see these small, bright, opaque flecks? They're scattered everywhere. They look like metal." I stared at the image, at the strange star-like pattern inside my own body. "Metal?" I asked, my voice a confused croak. "How was that possible?" "I have no idea," he replied, shaking his head in bewilderment. "It's incredibly dense. It almost looks like mercury. But that's impossible, unless you've been breaking and swallowing old thermometers." He laughed at his own weak joke, but his eyes were full of a serious, deep-seated concern. "I'm admitting you to the hospital immediately, Mr. Washington. We need to run some more tests. We need to figure out what this is and how it got there." I stood there, staring at the alien, glittering constellation inside my own body, a profound and terrifying sense of wrongness washing over me. The back pain, the reason I had come here, was forgotten. A new, far more sinister mystery had just presented itself. The hospital was a world of hushed, hurried efficiency. I was admitted, given a standard issue gown that did little to preserve one's dignity, and subjected to a battery of tests that were as invasive as they were bewildering. They drew vials of my blood. They took urine samples. They prepared me for an endoscopy, a small camera that would journey into the depths of my own body to get a closer look at the strange, glittering constellation that had taken up residence there. Through it all, I was a passive, compliant patient, my mind a numb fog of disbelief. Mercury. The word felt ancient, sinister, something from a dusty history book about Mad Hatters and Roman emperors. It did not belong in the quiet, suburban landscape of my retirement. That first evening, after I had been settled into a small, sterile room, I called my wife. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up, her voice a little breathless and irritated. "Jamal, is everything all right? I was just about to start my yoga class." "Aaliyah," I began, my voice a dry, scratchy thing. "They admitted me to the hospital. The doctor, he found something on the X-ray." "Admitted you?" she asked, and her tone was not one of panicked concern, but of profound, weary inconvenience. "For your back, Jamal, I told you that you were overreacting. You probably just pulled a muscle. It's not my back, I said, my own frustration beginning to cut through the fog of my confusion. He said he thinks I have mercury poisoning. There was a moment of pure, dead silence on the other end of the line. It was a silence so complete, I thought the call had been disconnected. Mercury, she finally repeated, the word a strange, flat thing in her mouth. That's ridiculous. How on earth would you get mercury poisoning? What have you been eating? I don't know, Aaliyah, I said, a desperate plea for comfort, for reassurance, creeping into my voice. I don't know anything. I'm scared. Well, I can't come down there right now, she said, her voice all business now. I have my class, and then I promised to have dinner with my sister. You know how she gets. The doctors are there. They'll take care of you. I'll try to stop by sometime tomorrow, if I can get away. She then said she had to go and hung up, leaving me in the humming, beeping silence of my hospital room, feeling more alone than I had ever felt on the vast, empty expanse of the open ocean. The next few days were a lonely, anxious blur. My son, Michael, sent a perfunctory text message. Heard you're in the hospital. Hope you feel better soon, Dad. But he did not call, and he did not visit. My wife did not appear. My only human contact was with the hospital staff, and it was through them that I met Zola. She was my daytime nurse, a woman of about 45, with skin the color of rich, dark coffee, and a smile that was a small, brilliant pocket of sunshine in the sterile, gray world of the hospital. She was from Nigeria, her accent a beautiful, melodic counterpoint to the flat, clinical language of the doctors. From our very first meeting, she treated me not as a medical case, a puzzle to be solved, but as a man. She moved with a gentle, unhurried efficiency, her touch both professional and profoundly kind. It was Zola who saw past my stoic, sailor's facade to the frightened old man beneath. You are a long way from the sea, Mr. Washington, she said one afternoon as she was checking my blood pressure. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, were full of a deep, knowing empathy. You can call me Jamal, I'd said, and yes, I suppose I am. My husband was a fisherman back home, she continued, her voice soft. He also had the look of the ocean in his eyes, a kind of permanent distance, as if he was always looking at the horizon, even when he was standing right in front of you. That small, simple observation, that acknowledgement of a part of my soul that my own family had never seen or had long ago stopped seeing, was a key. It unlocked something in me. I began to talk. I told her stories of my life at sea, of the storms I had weathered, of the strange and beautiful things I had seen. And she listened. She would sit with me for a few extra minutes after her rounds were done. Her presence a warm, comforting balm on the raw, open wound of my loneliness. She told me of her own journey, of the hardships she had faced coming to America, of her dream of bringing the rest of her family over one day. We were two people from different worlds, a retired sailor from Atlanta and a nurse from Africa. But we were bound by the shared, unspoken language of a life of struggle and survival. On the third day, the team of specialists returned with a verdict. The head doctor, a grim-faced man with a clipboard, stood at the foot of my bed. Mr. Washington, he began, his voice devoid of any bedside manner. Our toxicology reports are back from the lab, and they are conclusive. The substance in your digestive tract is indeed mercury, and based on the specific isotope and the concentration levels in your blood and tissue, This is not from a one-time acute exposure. You have been ingesting small, repeated doses over a long period of time. Months, perhaps even a year or more. He looked at me, his eyes a pair of cold, analytical instruments. The only plausible source for this kind of chronic, low-level poisoning would be through your diet, something you are eating or drinking on a daily basis. Who prepares your meals, Mr. Washington? The question, so simple, so logical, hit me with the force of a physical blow. Since my retirement, only one person had prepared my meals. Every breakfast, every lunch, every dinner, every cup of coffee in the morning, every glass of iced tea in the afternoon. It was all prepared by the same loving hands. The hands of my wife. As if on some terrible cosmic cue, the door to my hospital room swung open and Aaliyah walked in. It was the first time I had seen her in 3 days. She was dressed for a shopping trip, not a hospital visit, a large, expensive handbag on her arm. She looked at her watch, then at me, her face a mask of annoyed, dutiful concern. "Jamal," she said, her voice a little too loud in the quiet room. I was on my way to the mall and realized I was nearby, so I thought I'd pop in. "How are you feeling?" I stared at her, at my wife of 50 years, and the doctor's words echoed in the humming, beeping silence of the room. The only plausible source would be your food. A suspicion so monstrous, so unthinkable, so profoundly evil that my mind had refused to even form it, now began to take root in the desolate, barren soil of my heart. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I saw not a wife. I saw a suspect. The doctor's words hung in the sterile air of the hospital room. A pronouncement of a truth so monstrous it felt like a fiction. The only plausible source would be your food. I stared at my wife, Aaliyah, as she stood in the doorway, a vision of suburban elegance in her expensive yoga clothes, her large designer handbag slung over her shoulder. The scent of her perfume, a fragrance I had once found intoxicating, now seemed cloying and vaguely menacing. She was smiling, a bright, impatient smile, completely unaware of the verdict that had just been delivered. The verdict that had instantly, irrevocably transformed her in my eyes from my wife of 50 years into the prime suspect in the investigation of my own slow murder. The head specialist, a man clearly not paid for his social graces, turned his clinical gaze upon her. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat and accusatory, "we have determined that your husband is suffering from chronic, low-level mercury poisoning. The levels in his system are significant and indicate a long-term exposure." As I was just explaining to him, the only way this could have happened is through his diet at home. Aaliyah's reaction was a masterpiece of theatrical indignation. The impatient smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure outraged disbelief. "Mercury," she repeated, her voice rising with a perfectly pitched note of incredulity. "In my kitchen? That is the most offensive and absurd thing I have ever heard. I am a meticulous cook. My kitchen is spotless. This has to be a mistake from your hospital lab." She went on the offensive immediately, a classic tactic of a guilty party, attempting to discredit the evidence rather than address the accusation. The doctor, unmoved, simply raised an eyebrow. "The toxicology reports have been run twice, ma'am. They are conclusive. I suggest you think very carefully about any and all supplements, herbal remedies, or unusual ingredients you may have been using in your husband's meals." Aaliyah turned to me then, her eyes wide with a look of shared, victimized outrage. It was a performance, and it was a brilliant one. Jamal, can you believe this? They're trying to blame me for your illness. She rushed to my bedside, grabbing my hand, her touch feeling cold and reptilian. She began fussing over my blankets, a perfect pantomime of the concerned wife for the benefit of the medical staff. But as soon as the doctors had finished their questions and left the room, her demeanor changed. The warm, concerned wife vanished, and the cold, impatient woman I had come to know since my retirement returned. She dropped my hand and took a step back from the bed, looking at her watch. Jamal, this is an absolute nightmare, she said, her voice a low, irritated hiss. Do you have any idea how this makes me look? People will think I'm trying to poison you. You need to get this sorted out, and fast. I have a luncheon I simply cannot miss. She did not ask how I was feeling. She did not ask what the treatment would be. Her only concern was for her own reputation. She gave my cheek a quick, dry peck, and then she was gone, leaving behind only the lingering, menacing scent of her perfume. I lay in the silence, her visit having done nothing but solidify the terrible budding suspicion in my mind. Later that afternoon, Zola came in for her shift. She took one look at my face, and her cheerful professional demeanor softened into one of genuine human concern. Jamal, she said, her voice a gentle, melodic comfort as she checked the readings on my heart monitor. You seem 1,000 miles away today. The news from the doctors was heavy on your heart, I think. I looked at her, at this kind stranger who had shown me more genuine warmth in 3 days than my own wife, and the words just tumbled out before I could stop them. They think, Zola, they think the poison is coming from the food at my own home, I said, my voice a hoarse whisper, the food my wife cooks for me every day. Zola paused in her work, her dark, intelligent eyes meeting mine. She did not offer a cheap reassurance or a dismissive platitude. She was a woman who had seen the best and the worst of human nature, both in her home country and in the sterile, life and death theater of the hospital. She simply nodded, her expression one of grave understanding. In my village in Nigeria, she said softly, we have a saying, the mouth that eats does not talk. It means that sometimes a person cannot speak the truths they are forced to swallow. But your body, Jamal, your body is talking for you. It is telling a story that your mouth cannot. You must listen to what it is saying. And, she added, her gaze becoming sharp and serious, you must be very, very careful. She was not giving me an opinion. She was giving me permission to believe myself, to trust my own instincts. Her words, her quiet validation, gave me a surge of a strength I didn't know I had. I needed an ally. I needed to know if I was truly going insane, or if the world had become as monstrous as it now seemed. I picked up the phone and I called my son Michael. I was clinging to the desperate hope that he would be as shocked and outraged as I was, that he would be a partner in this terrible mystery. I told him everything the doctors had said. I waited for his angry, protective response. Instead, there was a strange, tense silence on the other end of the line, a silence that was almost identical to the one his mother had offered. Mercury, he finally said, his voice sounding strained and unnaturally high. Wow, Dad, that's crazy. He sounded not like a man who had just received shocking news, but like a man who had been caught in a terrible lie. Listen, Dad, I'm in the middle of a big meeting at work. I gotta go. I'm sure it's just a mistake. You know, Mom, she's a great cook. We'll talk later. He hung up before I could say another word. I placed the receiver back in its cradle, my hand as steady as a rock. The last desperate piece of the puzzle had just clicked into place. Michael's reaction was not one of shock. It was not one of concern. It was the reaction of a co-conspirator. And a new and even more sickening realization, a truth far more devastating than my wife's betrayal, settled into my heart with the cold, heavy certainty of a tombstone. He knew. He had known all along. My son knew his mother was poisoning me, and he had done nothing. I placed the phone receiver back into its cradle with a slow, deliberate precision, my hand as steady as a surgeon's. The world outside my hospital room window, the distant traffic, the hazy Atlanta skyline, continued on, oblivious, but inside the small, sterile confines of my room, and within the even smaller, more claustrophobic confines of my own heart, a universe had just ended. The betrayal of a wife is a deep and terrible wound, but the betrayal of a child, of your own son, is an annihilation of the soul. It is a negation of your entire life's work, a final brutal judgment on your own failure as a father. I had spent 40 years on the unforgiving expanse of the ocean, my hands raw from pulling nets, my body aching with a fatigue that settled deep in the marrow of my bones. I had endured the loneliness, the danger, the months away from home, all for him. Every dollar I had earned, every sacrifice I had made, had been a brick in the foundation of the life I wanted for him, a life of comfort and security I had never known. And in a single, evasive, and cowardly phone call, he had just confirmed that he was willing to stand by and watch his mother slowly poison me to death, all for the sake of that very foundation. The irony was so profound, so monstrous, it was almost a form of black cosmic humor. My mind, now cold and sharp with this new, terrible clarity, began to sift through the memories of the past few years, re-examining them through this new, horrifying lens. I saw my son's constant, low-grade complaints about money, his casual remarks about the rising cost of living, which I had once seen as the normal anxieties of a young family man. I now saw them as the strategic groundwork for his own perceived victimhood. I remembered the way he would defer to his mother in every argument, the way he would allow her to belittle me with a quiet, passive complicity. I had seen it as weakness, as a failure to stand up for himself. I now saw it as an alliance. They were a team, and I was not a member. I was the resource they were jointly managing, the aging, inconvenient asset they had decided to liquidate. The next day, Aaliyah visited again. This time, her performance was even more polished. She arrived with a bouquet of cheerful, cheap-looking carnations and a Tupperware container filled with what she claimed was my favorite homemade broth. She was the picture of the devoted, long-suffering wife, her face a mask of carefully constructed concern. "Jamal, honey," she said, her voice a soft, sympathetic coo, as she placed the flowers on my bedside table. "I've been doing so much research. This whole mercury thing, it just has to be a mistake." I spoke to a friend of mine who is a holistic nutritionist, and she said it's probably just a buildup of toxins from all those years you spent on those dirty ships. "We're going to get you on a good, clean diet when you get home. I'll take care of everything." I watched her, and for the first time, I was not a participant in the play. I was a critic in the audience. I saw the subtle tells, the tells the old soldier in me had been trained to spot. I saw the way her eyes didn't quite meet mine, the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in her hand as she offered me the container of broth, a broth I knew I would not be touching. I saw the way her concern was all about discrediting the doctor's findings, about creating an alternate narrative that absolved her of all responsibility. I played my part. I was the weak, confused, but grateful husband. "Oh, Aaliyah," I said, my voice a convincing, gravelly whisper. "You are a good woman. I don't know what I would do without you." "I'm sure you're right. The doctors are probably just overreacting." I saw the look of relief, of triumphant satisfaction, flood her face. She thought she had me. She thought I was still the same, trusting fool I had always been. "Of course I'm right, honey," she said, patting my hand. "You just focus on getting better. I'll handle everything else." She left a few minutes later, claiming she had to pick up some special organic vegetables for my new cleansing diet. After she was gone, I sat there, the untouched container of broth on my table, a clear, warm liquid that now looked as menacing as a vial of poison. The heartbreak inside me was beginning to coalesce, to harden into something else. It was no longer the soft, wounded grief of a victim. It was the cold, hard, and unyielding resolve of a survivor. The time for sorrow was over. The time for strategy had begun. Later that afternoon, Zola came in to take my vitals. She moved with her usual gentle efficiency, but her eyes were full of a quiet, knowing concern. She had seen my wife's brief, theatrical visit. "Jamal," she said, her voice low as she checked my pulse, "your heart is strong, but the heart of a man is more than a muscle. You must protect it." I looked at her, at this kind, wise stranger who had shown me more genuine humanity in a week than my own family had in a year. "Zola," I said, my voice quiet but firm, devoid of the weakness I had shown her before. "I need to ask you something. If a man, a patient in this hospital, needed to find a good, discreet lawyer, a fighter, someone who has helped people in difficult family situations before, would you know of such a person?" She did not ask for details. She did not pry. She simply looked at me, her compassionate gaze unwavering, and she nodded. "I know a woman," she said, "a very good, very strong woman. I will write down her name for you." She scribbled a name and a phone number on a piece of paper and pressed it into my hand. The slip of paper felt like a weapon, the first I had been given in a war I now knew I had to fight. The heartbroken old sailor was gone, washed away by a sea of betrayal. The man who was left was a soldier, and he was about to start planning his counterattack. I held the small folded piece of paper in my hand, the lawyer's name and number, a tangible symbol of a future I had not asked for, but which had now become a necessity. My thumb hovered over the call button on my phone. This was the moment of declaration, the point of no return. The moment I made this call, I would be formally declaring war on my own family, on the life I had known for 50 years. A part of me, the old Jamal, the man who had always valued peace and quiet above all else, hesitated. Was I being paranoid? Was I a sick, old man misinterpreting everything, constructing a monstrous conspiracy out of a series of unconnected, innocent facts? And then another memory, a seemingly insignificant conversation from 3 months ago, surfaced from the murky depths of my mind with a new and horrifying clarity. It was the day my son had the chance to be a hero and had instead chosen to be a coward. It had been a Sunday afternoon. I was sitting in my armchair in the living room, trying to read the paper, but a profound wave of weariness and a strange metallic taste in my mouth had made it impossible to concentrate. I had been feeling unwell for months by that point, a slow, creeping decline that I had attributed to nothing more than the inevitable betrayals of old age. Aaliyah was in the kitchen, humming as she prepared my afternoon iced tea, a daily ritual she had insisted upon, claiming the special blend of herbs she used was good for my circulation. Michael had stopped by, an infrequent and usually brief visit. He was standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, talking to his mother. I was only half listening, my attention foggy, until a snippet of their conversation cut through the haze. "Are you sure you put enough of the special supplement in it, Mom?" Michael had asked, his voice a low, nervous murmur. "Of course," Aaliyah had replied, her voice sharp, with an impatience that I now recognized as the irritation of a ringleader with a nervous subordinate. "A little extra today. He's been looking far too healthy this week." At that moment, Aaliyah had turned and seen me watching them. My newspaper lowered. I saw a flash of pure, unadulterated panic in her eyes before she masked it with a brilliant, brittle smile. "Oh, Jamal, honey," she'd exclaimed. "We were just talking about my new vitamin drops. For energy, I was just telling Michael he should try them." She brought me my glass of iced tea, her hand trembling ever so slightly. I had looked from her overly bright, false smile to my son's pale, evasive face. The soldier in me, the part that had been dormant for so long, had sensed a lie. The explanation was too quick, too neat. "What kind of supplement?" I had asked, my gaze fixed on Michael. He couldn't look at me. He stared at the floor, at the ceiling, at a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. "I don't know, Dad," he'd stammered. "Just some of her herbal stuff. You know how she is with all that health nonsense. Probably tastes terrible. I told her not to bother you with it." "It looked like you were trying to hide something, son," I had pressed, my voice quiet, a simple request for the truth from my own child. "Is everything all right?" This was his moment. This was his chance. He could have looked me in the eye. He could have pulled me aside. He could have been a man. He could have saved me. Instead, he chose his mother. He chose the lie. "Everything's fine, Dad," he'd said, his voice a little too loud, a little too defensive. "You're just tired. You're overthinking things, like you always do. Just let Mom take care of you. She knows what's best." He had then made a flimsy excuse about needing to run an errand and had practically fled the house, leaving me alone with my wife and her glass of sweet, cold poison. At the time, I had allowed myself to believe him. I had accepted his explanation because the alternative was simply too monstrous to contemplate. I had dismissed my own sharp, unerring instincts as the paranoid ramblings of a tired old mind. I had drunk the tea. Now, lying in his hospital bed, the memory returned not as a confusing, half-forgotten conversation, but as a damning piece of evidence. Michael had not just been silent. He had not just been a passive observer. He had been an active participant in the deception. He had seen the lie. He had known it was a lie. And he had helped his mother serve it to me. He had chosen to protect her secret rather than to protect his own father's life. The last lingering shred of my hope for my son's innocence died in that moment. The hesitation in my thumb, hovering over the call button on my phone, vanished. The question of whether I was overreacting was now an absurd, insulting joke. My grief for the family I had lost was incinerated by the cold, hard fury of a man who now understood the full, terrible scope of their betrayal. I pressed the call button. The phone on the other end rang twice before a woman answered, her voice crisp and professional. "Law offices of Ms. Anika Sharma," she said. My voice, when I spoke, was not the voice of a weak, sick old man. It was the voice of a 70-year-old soldier, a man who had been ambushed by his own blood and who was now finally ready to fight back. "My name is Jamal Washington," I said. My voice is cold and as clear as a block of ice. I was referred by a nurse at Grady Memorial named Zola. I believe my wife and my son are trying to murder me, and I need your help to stop them. The woman who walked into my hospital room the next afternoon was not what I had expected. I had pictured an older, gray-haired man like myself, a contemporary of Mr. Davies from my previous life story. But Miss Anika Sharma was a young, sharp, and impeccably dressed black woman who moved with an electrifying, no-nonsense energy. She was a bolt of lightning in the quiet, somber atmosphere of my recovery. And the moment she shook my hand, her grip firm and her gaze direct, I knew that Zola had sent me a warrior. "Mr. Washington," she began, pulling a chair up to my bedside and opening a sleek, leather-bound notebook. Zola gave me the broad strokes. "Now, I need you to tell me everything. Start from the beginning, and do not leave out a single detail, no matter how small or insignificant it may seem." And so, I did. I was a soldier giving a field report to a commanding officer. I laid out the facts with a cool, methodical precision, my voice a low, steady monotone. I told her about my retirement, about the cold, lonely atmosphere in my own home. I told her about the sudden, unexplained illness and the shocking X-ray results. I recounted the doctor's diagnosis of chronic mercury poisoning and their conclusion that the source had to be my food. I described Aaliyah's bizarre, dismissive reaction and my son Michael's panicked, evasive phone call. Finally, I told her about the memory that had resurfaced, the conversation from 3 months prior, where Michael had actively helped his mother conceal her special supplements. She listened, her pen flying across the page, not interrupting once. She did not look at me with pity or with shock. She looked at me with the focused, analytical gaze of a strategist assessing a battlefield. When I had finished, she was silent for a long moment, reviewing her notes. "All right, Jamal," she said finally, using my first name in a way that felt like a gesture of immediate alliance. "I've seen cases like this before. Greed makes people do monstrous things. From a legal perspective, here is where we stand. What you have right now is a powerful and compelling suspicion, supported by your own testimony and a clear motive, assuming there's a significant financial incentive like a will or an insurance policy." "There is," I said, and I told her about the life I had built, the modest fortune I had saved. She nodded grimly. "I thought so. But a suspicion, even a strong one, is not enough to stand up in court. Your wife will claim you're a confused old man. Your son will back her up. It becomes a messy, he said, she said. What we need," she said, her eyes narrowing with a sharp, intelligent light, "is irrefutable, contemporary proof. We need to catch them in the act, either of administering the substance or, even better, of admitting to their plot." "How do we do that?" I asked. "I'm trapped here in this hospital." "Not for long," she said with a confident smile. "Your doctor told me at the nurse's station that you're scheduled to be discharged in 2 days. That is our window of opportunity. Here is what we are going to do." The plan she laid out was audacious, risky, and brilliant. It was a classic sting operation, a quiet, Domestic counterinsurgency. You are going to go home, she explained, and you are going to play the part of a lifetime. You are to be weaker, more confused, and more grateful for their care than ever before. You will be the perfect, unsuspecting victim. You will make them feel safe. You will make them feel confident. You will make them feel that their plan is working perfectly. While you are playing your part, she continued, I will be working behind the scenes. I will hire a private investigator, a licensed and bonded professional I have worked with for years. He specializes in electronic surveillance. The morning you are discharged, while Aaliyah and Michael are here at the hospital picking you up, my investigator will enter your home. He will install a series of tiny, completely undetectable audio and video recording devices in the key strategic locations: the kitchen, the living room, and your bedroom. I stared at her, my mind reeling. It was a plan so bold, so daring, it felt like something out of a spy movie. It is perfectly legal, Jamal, she assured me, anticipating my next question. Under Georgia law, it is legal to record a conversation as long as you have the consent of at least one party. As the owner of the house, you are that one party. We will be building a fortress of evidence around them, and they will be completely unaware that they are our primary contractors. The final 2 days in the hospital were the longest of my life. I was no longer a patient recovering from an illness. I was a soldier preparing for a covert mission. When Aaliyah and Michael finally arrived to pick me up, I was ready. I played my part to perfection. I was frail, leaning heavily on my son's arm. I was grateful, thanking my wife profusely for coming to get me, for her beautiful flowers, for her promise to cook me a healthy, cleansing diet. Oh, of course, honey, Aaliyah said, her voice dripping with the same false sweetness that had once so thoroughly fooled me. We are going to take such good care of you. You're finally home. As they led me out of the hospital, 2 loving family members escorting their sick, elderly patriarch, I felt a cold, hard sense of purpose settle over me. I was not a victim returning to his captors. I was a soldier, a willing piece of bait, an undercover operative with a hidden earpiece and a team of professionals backing me up. I was re-entering enemy territory under deep cover with a clear and singular mission: to gather the evidence that would not just save my own life, but would bring their entire monstrous world crashing down around them. Returning to my own home as a Trojan horse was the single most difficult performance of my life. I was a soldier on a deep cover assignment, and the enemy was the woman sleeping in the bed beside me and the son I had raised. I played the part of the frail, grateful, and slightly confused old man to perfection. I leaned heavily on my son's arm as I walked from the car to the front door. I praised my wife's foresight in having the house so clean for my return, a lie that almost choked me as I surveyed the very kitchen where I knew she had been preparing my poison. I was weak, I was docile, and I was, in their eyes, a man whose will was slowly but surely eroding, a man who would soon be a manageable and ultimately profitable problem. The week that followed was a masterclass in quiet, nerve-shredding tension. The house was now wired for sound and video, a fact known only to me, my lawyer, and the discreet private investigator who had installed the devices while we were at the hospital. I was acutely aware of the tiny, unblinking eye of the camera, disguised as a carbon monoxide detector in the kitchen, and the powerful, silent ear of the audio recorder tucked away in the living room. I lived my life on a stage, every word and action a carefully calculated part of my performance. Aaliyah, convinced of my decline and emboldened by my new, pathetic gratitude, became less careful. She would prepare my meals with a great show of loving concern, a constant monologue about the healing properties of the special herbal teas and nutrient-rich broths she was making for me. I, in turn, would thank her profusely. I would take the food to my room to eat in peace, and then, with a heavy heart, I would scrape the lovingly prepared, mercury-laced meals into a sealed plastic bag that I would later dispose of in a public trash can miles from our home. I survived on the bland, pre-packaged protein shakes that Zola had recommended, which I kept hidden in my old Army foot locker, consuming them in the dead of night, like a prisoner with a secret stash of bread. Every day, I felt my strength returning, my mind growing clearer, a direct result of the real food and the absence of the poison. But to them, I performed a steady decline. I would feign a dizzy spell. I would pretend to forget a word mid-sentence. I was giving them the evidence they needed to build their narrative of my senility, all while my secret cameras were building the irrefutable, damning narrative of their criminality. After a full week of this tense, domestic espionage, the private investigator returned, again, while I had created a plausible reason for my wife and son to be out of the house. He discreetly retrieved the memory cards and left a new set. That afternoon, I sat with Ms. Sharma in her quiet, professional office, a space that now felt more like a home to me than my own house. The investigator, a grim-faced man named Frank, sat with us as we reviewed the evidence. The video footage was the first to be played, and it was as chilling as I had imagined. On the large monitor, I watched my own kitchen, my own wife. I saw her at the stove, preparing my daily iced tea. I saw her pull the small, unlabeled vial from the back of the spice rack, a place she thought no one would ever look. I watched her, her movements casual and routine, as she added a few clear, viscous drops of the liquid to my glass before swirling it and placing it on a tray. The look on her face was not one of malice or of anger. It was a look of pure, bored, domestic efficiency. She was a woman doing a chore, like watering a plant or taking out the trash. I was a task to be managed, and my slow death was simply a long, slightly tedious project she was determined to see through to its conclusion. But it was the audio evidence that truly sealed their fate. Frank isolated a conversation from the living room from 2 nights prior, after they believed I was asleep. I put on the headphones Ms. Sharma offered me, and I listened to the sound of my own family plotting my demise. Aaliyah's voice was sharp, impatient. "He's still getting up every morning, Michael. I don't understand it. The doctor said his heart was weak. This should be working faster." Then my son's voice, a reedy, anxious whine. "I don't know, Mom. I saw him in the garden yesterday. He looked stronger. This whole thing is making me nervous. Maybe we should just stop." "Stop!" Aaliyah's voice was a low, venomous hiss. "Don't you dare get weak on me now, son. We are too close. Have you forgotten the debts we have? Have you forgotten what those people will do if we don't pay them? That inheritance is our only way out. It's for our future. It's for your family. He's had a long, full life. It's our turn now. You just need to hold your nerve." The conversation continued, a brutal and damning litany of their greed and their utter lack of a moral compass. I took off the headphones, the silence of the lawyer's office, a welcome relief. Miss Sharma looked at me, her eyes full of a cool professional fury. "We have them, Jamal," she said, her voice quiet but absolute. "We have it all. Conspiracy to commit murder. The video evidence of the adulteration of food. The audio of their stated intent. It's an open and shut case." She leaned forward. "So now you have a choice. We can take this to the district attorney's office right now. I can have a detective at your house to arrest them within the hour. Or," she said, a small strategic smile playing on her lips, "we can handle this another way, a quieter way perhaps. The choice is yours." I thought of my grandchildren, of the shame and the trauma a public trial would inflict upon them. I thought of my own name, of the quiet dignity I had tried to live with my entire life. And I thought of Zola, of her quiet strength, of the new peaceful future she represented. I knew what I had to do. This would not end with a loud, messy, public explosion. It would end as it began, quietly in the heart of my own home, with a final, devastating act of justice. I did not go to the police. I did not want the ugly, sterile machinations of the legal system to be the final chapter of my family story. I did not want my grandchildren to see their father and grandmother's faces on the evening news, their family shame a spectacle for the entire city to consume. No, this was a private war, and it required a private and more profound form of justice. My lawyer, Miss Sharma, understood my decision completely. Together, we crafted the terms of their surrender. It was not a negotiation. It was a non-negotiable directive. The final family meeting was held not in my home, but in the cold, neutral territory of Ms. Sharma's conference room. I arrived first, with Zola by my side, her calm, strong presence, a silent testament to the new life I was choosing. When Aaliyah and Michael were shown in, they looked like two shipwrecked survivors, their faces pale, their eyes hollow, with a mixture of terror and defeat. They sat opposite us at the long, polished mahogany table, the space between us as wide and as cold as an ocean. I did not speak. I allowed Miss Sharma to be my voice, my sword, and my shield. She laid out the terms with a cool, dispassionate precision. First, the divorce. Aaliyah would sign the papers, which had already been drafted, immediately. She will receive not a single penny of my assets, a right she had forfeited the moment she had begun her poisonous campaign. She would be allowed to take her personal belongings from the house and nothing more. Second, the house itself. It would be sold immediately. The proceeds would be placed into an irrevocable trust, the same trust I had established in my will, for the sole benefit of my grandchildren. I would be the sole, unchallengeable trustee. Third, my son. He would not be charged as a co-conspirator, a single act of mercy on my part for the sake of his children. But he would be permanently and irrevocably cut off from my finances. He would have to find his own way in the world, to finally become the man his father, in his quiet, disappointed way, had always wished him to be. And finally, the most important term of all. They would have no further contact with me, ever. The restraining order I had initially considered was a legal document. This was a personal one, a final, absolute severing of all ties. They sat there, two small, broken people, as the architecture of their lives was systematically dismantled. There were no arguments. There were no protests. They had been so thoroughly and completely outmaneuvered that all the fight had been drained out of them. They signed the documents with trembling hands, their signatures the final, pathetic scrawls at the end of a long and tragic story. After they had gone, their footsteps echoing down the long, silent hallway of the law office. A profound sense of peace settled over me. The war was finally over. The months that followed were a period of quiet, joyful reconstruction. I sold a large, lonely house in Atlanta, a place now so thoroughly tainted by the ghosts of their betrayal that I could no longer find peace within its walls. I did not, however, move to a smaller, more sensible home. I did something that the old Jamal, the man who had always put his family's needs before his own, would have never dared to do. I bought a beautiful, sun-drenched condominium on the coast of Florida, a place with a wide balcony that overlooked the turquoise waters of the Gulf. It was a home for me, a place of healing, a sanctuary of my own making. And I was not alone. Zola, the kind, compassionate nurse who had been my first and only ally, had become something more. The quiet friendship we had forged in the sterile confines of the hospital had blossomed in the warm Florida sun into a deep and profound love. She was a woman of quiet strength, of immense kindness, of a wisdom that seemed as deep and as ancient as the ocean itself. She had left her old life behind, just as I had, and together we were building a new one, a life built not on the shifting, treacherous sands of blood and obligation, but on the solid, unshakable bedrock of mutual respect, shared laughter, and a quiet, comfortable love. We were married on a beach at sunset, a small, simple ceremony with a handful of my old Army buddies and her friends from the hospital as our witnesses. She was 45, I was 70, but in the quiet, peaceful landscape of our new life, age was just a number. We were two survivors, two souls who had weathered our own private storms, and we had found a safe harbor in each other. My son, Michael, I have not seen or spoken to since that day in the lawyer's office. I hear through the grapevine that he and Aaliyah are still together, their marriage a prison of their own making, bound not by love, but by their shared, bitter failure. I have made peace with his absence. The grief for the son I lost is a quiet, permanent ache in my heart, but it no longer defines me. My grandchildren, however, are a different story. The trust I established ensures they are well cared for, and they spend their summers with us in Florida. I am teaching them to fish, to sail, to be good and kind and honorable people. I am giving them the one thing I failed to give their own father, a model of a life lived with integrity, a life where happiness is not a thing to be schemed for, but a thing to be earned through honesty, through kindness, and through the quiet, steady strength of one's own character. The poison my wife tried to put in my body failed to kill me, but it succeeded in a way she never intended. It killed the sad, lonely, and unloved man I had become, and it allowed a new, happier, and finally truly free man to be born in his place.